She woke up to the sharp cry of her alarm clock, the sound slicing through the silence of her small, dimly lit apartment. Her body felt heavy, weighed down not only by exhaustion but also by the familiar burden of bills stacked on her kitchen table, unopened letters from debt collectors, and the gnawing ache of loneliness that had followed her for years. Her name was Clara, a woman in her early 40s who worked long shifts as a cleaner in a bustling elementary school. Every day was the same: rise before dawn, take the bus into town, and spend her hours scrubbing floors, wiping chalkboards, and picking up after children who barely knew she existed. To most, she was invisible. But this day would not be like the others. Something would happen before the sun had set, something small and unexpected, yet powerful enough to change her life forever. And it would come not from her boss, not from a friend, not even from a stranger on the street, but from the soft, innocent words of a child. Backhand index pointing right: if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the beauty of small miracles, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support helps these stories reach hearts around the world, just like yours. Clara buttoned her worn, faded uniform and tied her shoes, her hands moving automatically as her mind wandered back to the struggles she had faced. Her husband had left years ago, unable to handle the financial hardships that followed when Clara lost her office job during a company downsizing. Since then, life had been a constant uphill climb: temporary jobs, borrowed money, sleepless nights. She had once dreamed of being a teacher, guiding children, helping them grow, but those dreams had been buried under survival and necessity. Now, she taught no one. She simply cleaned. That morning, the bus ride to school felt longer than usual. The world outside was gray, covered in a light drizzle that blurred the windows and muted the colors of passing houses. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and thought of her daughter, Emma, who lived in another state with her grandparents. Clara hadn't been able to give her the life she deserved, and every time she thought of her, guilt pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. By the time she arrived at the school, the hallways were already buzzing with children's laughter, shoes squeaking against the polished floor, and the faint hum of teachers trying to corral the chaos into order. Clara slipped through unnoticed, heading to the storage closet where her mop and bucket waited. She began her routine, her movements practiced and mechanical, each sweep and scrub a reminder of her place in the background of this lively, colorful world. As she moved past the second-grade classrooms, she paused for a moment. Through the open door, she caught sight of small hands raised eagerly in the air, faces glowing with excitement as the teacher asked a question. Clara's chest tightened. Once, long ago, she had imagined herself standing at the front of such a class, her voice guiding curious minds, her smile encouraging those who struggled. But that dream felt like another lifetime, someone else's life, not hers. She lowered her eyes and kept walking. Around midday, when the lunch bell rang and children spilled into the cafeteria, Clara moved in to tidy up the empty classrooms. That's when it happened. She was bending over a desk, straightening a stack of papers, when she heard a small voice behind her. "Miss Clara, why don't you smile?" The words were simple, spoken with pure innocence, but they pierced through her like lightning. Clara turned, startled. A little boy stood at the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his head tilted slightly as he looked at her. His name was Daniel, a quiet child who often stayed behind after class, waiting for his older brother. His eyes were wide, curious, and filled with a kind of unfiltered honesty that only children possess. Clara opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. She forced a small smile, one that trembled at the edges, and said softly, "I'm just tired, sweetheart." But Daniel didn't seem satisfied. He stepped closer, his little shoes tapping against the floor, and said, "My teacher says smiling makes the world better. Maybe if you smiled, your world would be better too." The word struck her deeper than she could explain. Her chest ached, her throat tightened, and she quickly turned back to the desk, pretending to busy herself so the boy wouldn't see the tears gathering in her eyes. Daniel, sensing nothing unusual, simply waved and ran off to join his brother. Clara stood frozen in that empty classroom, the child's words echoing in her ears like a haunting melody. Maybe if you smiled, your world would be better too. That night, when she returned to her lonely apartment, Clara couldn't shake the moment. She sat at the small table, staring at the unopened letters of debt, the silence pressing in on her. For years she had carried her pain like armor, convincing herself that life had nothing left to offer. But those innocent words had cracked something open inside her. A child had seen her, not as a cleaner, not as a shadow in the background, but as a human being deserving of joy. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to wonder, what if he was right? The next morning, she made a choice. It was small, almost silly, but it felt monumental. She braided her hair neatly, put on a touch of lipstick she hadn't used in years, and looked at herself in the mirror. Then she smiled. It felt awkward at first, like a stranger had borrowed her face. But slowly, it began to feel real. When she arrived at school that day, she greeted the children she passed with a smile. At first, they looked surprised, many had never seen her expression change from tired neutrality. But then, something magical happened. They smiled back. Little hands waved, little voices said hello. Teachers nodded warmly at her, some even thanked her for her hard work. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and suddenly Clara was not invisible anymore. In the days that followed, Clara found herself changing in ways she never expected. She began humming softly as she worked. She lingered by the classroom doors, listening to lessons, remembering her old dream of teaching. And one afternoon, when a teacher asked if she could help a struggling student with reading practice, Clara agreed. To her surprise, the little girl clung to her every word, her eyes lighting up with understanding as Clara patiently guided her through the story. That night, Clara wept, not from sadness, but from a deep well of gratitude she had thought she no longer had. For the first time in so long, she felt alive. She realized that her life wasn't over, that she still had something to give, something to share. And all of it had begun with the simple, innocent question of a child. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's world continued to shift. She began volunteering in classrooms during her breaks, helping with reading groups and art projects. Teachers noticed her patience, her natural ability to connect with the children, and soon the principal offered her the chance to take evening courses to pursue her long-forgotten dream of teaching. Clara was hesitant at first, money was still tight, her fears still real, but then she remembered Daniel's words. Maybe if you smiled, your world would be better too. And so she took the leap. Every evening after work, Clara attended classes at the community college. She was older than most of the students, her hands calloused from years of cleaning, but her heart burned with a determination she hadn't felt in decades. Slowly, steadily, she worked toward her certification. And every time she felt doubt creeping in, she thought of that little boy, and she smiled. Years later, Clara would stand at the front of a classroom, not as a cleaner, but as a teacher. Her name would be written on the board, her students would call her Mrs. Clara, and her smile would light up the room. She would never forget where she came from, nor the child who had unknowingly given her back her life. Sometimes, she would catch herself staring out the window, remembering the weight of those years, the loneliness, the despair. And then she would whisper softly to herself, a child's words changed everything forever. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive and spreading kindness everywhere. Sparkles, before we end, here's a special request. In the comments, write the words, "Kindness changes lives," to remind the world of the power of compassion. Because sometimes, the smallest words from the smallest voices carry the greatest power.